Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker, this is Sporting Logically, and today is Trade Machine Tuesday. This is a weekly series in which I take a look at a few players that are subject to trade rumors and use the ESPN trade machine to try and find realistic deals for them. Most of you already know how this works, so I'll go ahead and get started. First up is a player that I've been looking forward to featuring in this series and has been requested for a while, Kemba Walker. There are actually a ton of options on the trade market for him, especially compared to the other two players on this list. He's the best point guard of the three and is also on the most easily tradable contract. At his $12 million salary for next season, you can easily send him to a contender with some assets or a middle tier team looking to take the next step. The only real issue that decreases his value is he does become a free agent in 2019. So teams trading for him will need to be confident he'll be willing to come back the following offseason on a reasonable deal. The first trade is if LeBron James stays in Cleveland, and it's Walker to the Cavs for Jordan Clarkson and the 8th overall pick in the 2018 draft, or the player selected with it. Let's begin with the Hornets. This deal is all about the pick, as Clarkson is more of a salary matching hindrance to the deal than anything else, with 2 years left on his contract after this season that's pretty expensive for a player of his production. With that pick, the Hornets could bolster their roster that is shockingly low on young talent with as many times as they have picked in the lottery recently. In a different draft, a mid to late lottery pick might not be valuable enough to pry away an all-star caliber player like Walker, but this year there are a handful of guys that could be available around the selection that have the potential to be a real difference maker for years to come. For the Cavs, as I said, this trade only happens if LeBron stays around after this season. The team will need to add perimeter playmaking to help take some of the historic workload of this past season off James' shoulders, and adding Walker would be a great start. We all know that James won't have the patience to wait around for a rookie to develop into a contributor, so swinging a deal to finally fill the gap at the one left behind by Kyrie Irving, although Walker isn't as good of a player as he was, is definitely a priority. The second trade is Walker and Tyler Zeller to the Indiana Pacers for Darren Collison, Al Jefferson, Domontis Sabonis, and the 23rd pick in the 2018 draft. Let's begin with the Hornets. The idea of adding some young talent is very much the same as the previous trade, but they're also getting some salary relief as a result of the young assets they're getting in return in this deal not being as valuable as the lottery pick they received from the Cavs previously. Zeller is a solid player, but paying him $44 million over the next few seasons isn't a smart decision for a team that is a fringe playoff contender in the East at best. Dealing him and Walker in exchange for expiring contracts, an intriguing young big, and a late first-round pick is pretty good value in a league in which not many teams need a point guard or have the space to facilitate this kind of salary dump. For the Pacers, this could really turn out to be a steal if they can manage to bring Walker back on a reasonable deal in the summer of 2019. Collison is a solid guard, and Sabonis is a tough piece to lose, but both players they get back in the deal are upgrades from what they have on the roster right now. Walker and Victor Oladipo would form one of the better two-way backcourts in the league, and the addition of Kemba gives the team a boost of perimeter playmaking that they desperately need, specifically when Oladipo is off the floor. Zeller is an expensive option, but when healthy is a really productive player that can play with or without his new frontcourt partner Miles Turner on the floor. As I mentioned before, making sure they can bring back Walker on a deal that works for both sides will be crucial to making this whole deal work. But if they can, it would be a nice step in the right direction for the team to continue to climb the ladder in the East. Next up is probably the most difficult entry I've ever attempted to make to this point in the Trade Machine Tuesday series. Terry Rozier certainly increased his value across the league during the Celtics playoff run, but he also had enough bad games for people to question whether it was real improvement that allowed him to play the way he did, or just a month-and-a-half long hot streak once Kyrie Irving went down. I spent a lot of time trying to find deals for Rozier, and in the end I really just couldn't find one that made much sense. There's so much up in the air with the Celtics guard rotation for next season, and whether or not Rozier actually gets traded really depends on what they decide to do with Marcus Smart. If they bring back Smart, they could keep Rozier for another year before he becomes a restricted free agent, or they could deal him at the deadline when a team with injury problems might be willing to give up more in return than they would during the offseason. If they don't bring back Smart, they can just keep Rozier for this coming season and deal with his impending free agency when it happens. But for now, let's just assume the Celtics re-sign Smart and are looking to trade Rozier. Here's the checklist I had to go down to try and find a realistic trade partner. First, which teams need a league average to above league average starting point guard? That automatically cuts the list down to about 5 or 6 teams that either don't have a player better than Rozier at that spot already, or a young player that they're grooming for the position. Next, which of those teams have a player that fits the few needs the Celtics have left? They probably need to add a mobile and versatile big man, but that's about it. They're probably good on the wings and wouldn't trade Rozier for another guard, and even if they need another big, they still have plenty of draft picks moving forward to try and find one there without even giving up Rozier. So that makes the list even smaller. And then of those teams that quote-unquote need Rozier and have someone the Celtics would be willing to take back for him, how many of those players are on contracts that would actually match with Rozier's rookie deal of a little over $3 million for next season? The problem is that the Celtics basically have an entire roster of rookie contract and max salary players, which because they're over the cap, makes it extremely difficult to find trades for Scary Terry. I've seen plenty of people throw Gordon Hayward's name into trade talks, but even Danny Ainge wouldn't do that. And besides, many people's reasoning for trading Hayward, that they already have enough wings, isn't really a thing in the modern NBA. There's no such thing as having too many two-way players on the perimeter that can play multiple positions, and that's been a huge part of Boston's team building strategy for the past few years, so he isn't going anywhere. That really just leaves the team with tacking on Marcus Morris to a Rozier trade to try and make the salaries work. But again, there just aren't many teams that need players like those two, have something to give back the Celtics they would actually want, and have contracts to make it work. If you're looking for two scenarios in which Rozier could be traded straight up for another player, maybe I could see him going to Miami for Justice Winslow, or to Phoenix for Jogan Bender or Marcus Chris, but even those are a bit of a stretch. In the end, with all this in mind, I don't see a reasonable trade out there for Terry Rozier as the Celtics roster is currently constructed this offseason. If it was me, I would let Smart walk, bring back Rozier for another season off the bench, and look to draft his replacement this year or next. Last up is the community choice for this week's episode, Dennis Schroder. After handing over the starting point guard role to the young German, things have quickly soured between the player and the team. They have one of, if not the worst rosters in the league, and Schroder had more than his fair struggles this season, partially as a result of that. At this point, it seems best for the two to part ways. The trade is Schroder to the Clippers for some expiring deals and the 13th pick in the 2018 draft, or the player selected with it. For the Clippers, this is just all about preference. If they're trying to build a team over the long term, then they likely don't make this deal and just draft a point guard with the 13th pick rather than trade for one in Schroder. But on the other hand, if they want to improve their chances of making the playoffs now, as keeping Doc Rivers around as head coach would seem to imply, then Schroder would be a nice piece to add to make that happen. Apart from the pick, they really aren't losing much on-court production. Beverley's a good player but continues to struggle with injuries, and the other two are just contract filler at this point in their careers. Having the luxury of plenty of expiring deals and 2 lottery picks at their disposal makes the Clippers one of the more intriguing teams of the offseason, and this wouldn't be a bad deal to make if they want to make some noise in the West next season and try to convince DeAndre Jordan to stick around. For the Hawks, this is probably about as good as it gets in terms of value for Schroder via trade. They get rid of his salary once these expiring deals come off in 2019, and a draft pick to select another building block alongside promising rookie big John Collins. Expecting anything more than this would be pretty unrealistic, as most teams just don't need a player like Schroder on the roster. And that is the end of this week's episode of Trade Machine Tuesday, and I thank you all very much for watching. As always, if you have any suggestions for future episodes, be sure to let me know down in the comments below. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.